Hello everyone, I'm Hardik and in today's section we will take a look at image segmentation, which is a core component in image signal processing. Now, this is a brief overview of what we'll be covering today. We have starting off with how images are centered in computers, then we'll go to our main topic for today, that is what segmentation exactly is and why it's needed. Then we'll take a look at some of the main segmentation techniques as well as some major types of segmentation. Then we also cover some of the real-time applications as well as some key limitations faced by image segmentation algorithms. Also, we'll at the end, we'll take a look at some vital implementation of the segmentation techniques we'll be covering in today's session. Now, moving on, let's see what images are basically two-dimensional signals as far as the computer is concerned. They are basically a function over the x2 axis representing the image. So you have the two axes, and at a point it will have the value for both the axes. Now, if you were to perform a function on those values, you can get the image pixel intensity. Now, the function will be different whether it's a grayscale image or which has only a single channel and it will be a single value. And for higher dimensional signals, you'll have a vector of the values. Now, moving on, let's see what image segmentation is. It is basically a technique to divide a digital image into separate regions based on some parameters. As to why it's needed, let's see, for instance, when you want to detect, you have a surveillance camera and you want to detect some kind of movement for people. In that case, the image that is being trained by the system has to know what exactly is in the image, right? As far as it's concerned, you can only see the pixel intensity values. You can't understand what exactly it is in the image. Now, that's where image segmentation helps the computer to analyze it. And yes, but exactly what we're talking about. To distinguish the parts of the image, the different components itself, you need image segmentation. Like it's like a coloring book. Like when you are starting to color a picture, right? You first have to draw it with the well-defined boundaries, the object defined objects, then only you can color it. Image segmentation is in a way a reversal of this process. You already have the picture with all the details, all the component. Now you are using some kind of a operation, a process to obtain and analyze what exactly the different regions are in the image. Now you use some kind of parameters to obtain these details. Now we see that as the some of the techniques used in image segmentation. Starting off, we'll start with the most basic technique, that's thresholding. You have a threshold value that is initially chosen, and each pixel intensity in the image is compared with this value. And related to that, the new pixel intensity is assigned. So usually what happens is if the value is higher than the threshold, then you assign otherwise you assign. Now expanding on this thresholding, we've got edge detection. Now, in an image, what exactly, how can you detect edges? Mathematically, if you take the pixel densities and you consider edges, you'll have two different objects on both sides of the edges. Just right. So you have a sudden change in the pixel density. Now you can use this property to detect edges. So if you were to have a like a solution kernel, basically you can apply which can apply a gradient to this each pixel value. You can find the change in the pixel densities, and usually that can detect edge detection. You can make it more optimized in many different ways, and some of the algorithms that does exactly that include Sobel, Canny, and all. Now let's look at some more complex but at the same time more accurate algorithms and techniques used in segmentation. First one, you got clustering algorithms. Well, as you can see here, you have a data set, and using some probability statistical models, you can convert them into clusters. And if you look here, you'll find that each of the clusters has a middle value. Basically, a central kind of. Now, these are major parts of how clustering algorithm works. Now, there are many clustering algorithms such as k-means and Gaussian models, etc. And so here, let's take the example of k-means clustering. Now, what exactly we do in the beginning is we assign k centroids on different parts of the image. Now, the different parts will represent the clusters of the image. Now, we perform a recursive process in which we take each centroid, we consider the pixels nearby the centroid, and you basically average them out, and you get a new centroid value, and that you assign as the new centroid of this cluster. And you just do that for each of the clusters, and you repeat this process until when there is little change in the centroids. Now, what does that mean? When you have little change in the centroid anymore, it means that the clusters with similar properties, with similar patterns are formed. That's why there isn't much of a change in the centroid. And that is what we require. Like, so you have got an image with similar regions, and you apply this type of a clustering algorithms, and you get different clustering regions, different clusters, right? Now, towards the end, we'll see an implementation of this as to how exactly it works and what parameters we are modifying to make it more precise, and what are the trade-offs. Now, coming to neural networks, it's a relatively recent, compared to other ones, a recent simulation algorithm. Now, unlike the other algorithms which are basically work on the numerical analysis, like you have the pixel intensity values, and it uses its operations on the pixel intensities. Neural networks doesn't do that. Neural networks first are trained on an image dataset and use that training to identify regions. So unlike the algorithms and techniques we've seen till now, neural networks actually can understand what exactly is in the object. The other algorithms basically approximate that using the things like HAR, like detecting edges or detecting clusters. They're approximating that it may be a segment, a distinct segment. But neural networks, unlike them, can actually distinguish, actually see that there are this particular object or this particular segment in the image. Now, usually you have many different layers, and as you go through a layer, you can identify different properties. So, usually in the early layers, you will identify things like edges and more less detailed parts. Then, towards the deeper layers, we identify more semantic features like the specific objects and regions. Some main architectures nowadays used to include UNet, VASPAR, CNN, and etc. And you can also see that different architectures are specialized in different fields. So you don't have a one architecture for the same field. They use different data sets, and that's the main thing. The data sets they use will be different and more accurate in those particular fields. Now, coming to the main three types of image segmentation, we have semantic and instance segmentation. Now, semantic segmentation basically assign a class to different objects of an image. So the key property is you have like an image with different types of object, not different objects, but different types of object. And semantic segmentation aims to assign a class label to these different classes. And the limitation of this is that the individual objects of this same class are not distinguished. So consider an image with like many number of trees or like many different vehicles. The class may be assigned to this all same class may be assigned to all the vehicles or all the trees. You don't have a manner in which you can distinguish between the same objects of the same type. Right. Now, instance segmentation is an improvement over semantic one. For what it does is it can distinguish between individual objects of the same class. And it assign a label with every pixel of the different objects. Right. And the main limitation of instance segmentation is that it cannot handle not well-defined regions like background regions. Like you have skies and you have like large amorphous regions and other considered buildings and patches of grass, fields, and very structures like that. Now, building upon these two segmentation, you have panoptic segmentation, which combines the two segmentation techniques, semantic and instance, and you'll get a complete understanding of the image. Now, there is both class level distribution as well as individual object instances are distinguished as well. So, if you were to see this image in semantic segmentation, you are assigning a class to everything, but at the same time, you are not distinguishing between the same types of the same different types of object of the same class. On the other hand, you have instance segmentation that assigns labels to different objects, even ones of the same class. But at the same time, the larger amorphous regions, which are like the sky, the huge buildings, are all not considered. They are basically ignored. Now, panoptic segmentation, you can see in the combination of these two individual objects of the different classes are uh, distinguished, as well as the individual object instances of the same class are distinguished as well. And as you can see, it can call it the a more complete segmentation. Now, this we already talked about some of the applications. We have medical image sensing where it can be segmentation can be used to identify tumors and other anatomical issues, and we have security surveillance. So you want to detect a movement or objects or people in a from the input from something like a camera sensor, you can use a segmentation based processing block. Similarly, you got autonomous vehicle, which makes use of image segmentation to detect all road lanes and traffic signs and etc. And yeah, we talked about medical image sensing, and this is a specific example where you have a scan, some kind of a image medical image scan, which can be like MRI or CRT or something. And then you apply an image segmentation process on that. And the system would give you assign different parts of the organ in the tissues, like depending on colors and the gradient and other similar parameters. And why it's important? It helps the surgeons and the doctors measure the growth of tumors, identify the presence of it in a more error-prone and more accurate manner. Right. Now, another a standard neural network image, neural network technique used in medical fields are unit. I believe it was published in 2015 and plays a major role in even nowadays in a lot of medical related fields like in identifying what do you say like tumors and all. Like it uses a very large and vast data set consisting of like more than 300K medical related images to identify distinguish the even the smallest of details. Now, again, segmentation is not without its limitations. You have the most obvious one, the computational cost, especially if you look at the modern day recurring segmentation techniques, which yes provides you more accuracy, but only at the expense of large GPU power and processing time. Right, and it can't work on low-end hardware, so you have more hardware-related costs as well. And some other limitations are overlapping objects as well as more complicated backgrounds in the image. But you can deal it, we are dealing with this using more techniques like neural networks can deal with it in a much better manner. Now, we'll come to the actual implementation of some of the simulation techniques that we look at. Let's start with looking at some of thresholding and edge detection and also a minor k-means clustering technique. So what we are using, we are right the code is written in Python and I'm using the OpenCV library, which is an open source library used for computer vision, machine learning purposes. Now I'm using NumPy matplotlib for the math functions. And so I have an original, I already ran the code, so I'll run it again once more. Um, so yes, as you can see, this is the original image that I passed here, and this is a threshold image. So the threshold value we are giving is 127, as you can see here, and it's completely arbitrary. You can give any other value, but like if I were to give like a low value, you'll see that See, you'll see that the image becomes much more brighter, right? A lot of the dark regions are gone. So usually what we do is we take a value somewhere in the middle between the 0 and 255. So 255 is the like full dark value. So it's a maximum pixel density for a grayscale image. And so you take a value somewhere in between. So you'll get the maximum segmentation, maximum possible details using the thresholding. Now we come to Sobel and Canning, which are both edge detection algorithms. And you can see here the edges of the parent in the image are much more clearly defined than in case of thresholding. You see the pan, you see the Sobel here. Now, for this, both of these as well, you can adjust the parameters. So, for instance, let's make the Chinese thresholds higher, and you'll see that the edges become much more less, right? So, similarly, yeah, let's come to flamings. Now, flamings in this case, we are only using fixed iterations. You can use more if you want higher accuracy. So, as you can see in flamings, it's not a grayscale image, right? Yeah, it actually directly works on the full resolution image itself, the RGB image itself. Not you have to convert to a grayscale version. And and as such, you have much more higher details here. We'll come to gamings again in the next one. Now, see, yeah, we'll take a much more detailed look at gamings and how the parameter we are controlling. So we are controlling the number of iterations that gaming will sell. Now, when we look at the slides, we see how came into the recursive step and you're basically reassigning the clusters Android, right? Now, if you were like, let's start with the most basic one. We'll make just two iterations. Like, at the most basic level, as you can see, like, it only assigns two different values when there is only two iterations, right? So there's only the most basic distribution here. We only have two clusters, discolored and discolored. So if I were to increase it to a nostalgic value, you have more number of colors, even more number of clusters, and the image becomes much more detailed. And if you further increase it to like higher values, you find that image becomes more detailed, maybe a little too much. Like there are regions you don't want to segment. Like they are too small, too fine details that you may not want to segment, but they may segment it, and in a way it makes it only worse, right? You need to choose a trade-off between getting fine details, but not making it too fine that even the more minor parts where you don't want to segment are being clustered. Right. See, as you can see, or it's saying the smallest of things are being segmented. See, increase the value of k. Now we'll take a look at a neural network model. Here we are using the model that's present in Colab itself. So I already downloaded that model, which is already pre-trained. It works on a Google's on deep vision model, and that's what we are using the library here. The model is GitLab version 3, and this one, the Resonate 50, is the part, the feature extracting part of this library. And also, this particular model uses the Coco dataset, which is a vast open source dataset that contains several hundreds thousands of images and assigns the different classes to the image. Now, if I were to run this, you find that it takes a much longer time as the dataset has to go through all different images and find all the what exactly is in the image, right? And let's see. Okay, so it's already run, and you can see that the data set exactly identifies the bird as it is. Everything else is ignored, is flat, right? And even detect the class, you have the background class and you have the bird class. So unlike the other algorithms, as we said earlier, as we seen earlier, the neural network model can actually identify what's in the image because of the pre-training it brought from the data set that it's been trained on, or the different images that it's been trained on. It has an idea of what exactly a bird is. And it's assigning, it's segmenting that part of the bird, right? And it's looking and seeing what exact class it actually matches, and you can see the class as well. So this was a demonstration of some of the techniques that we see in our slides, right? So yes, that's it. Thank you.